I'm Jolene Wynn, and this is the Porn Addict's Wife podcast, episode number 116, Someone to Blame. Your life does not have to revolve around your husband's pornography addiction. You are not defined by his choices or by what he sees on a screen. You are not just the porn addict's wife. You are so much more. In this podcast, I'm going to teach you how to go from handling it to healed, because I've been where you are and you don't have to stay there. My name is Jolene Wynn. I'm a member of the LDS Faith, a certified life coach, and a wife of a former porn addict. And this is a podcast for the porn addict's wife. Hello, my ladies. How are you? I feel like I haven't talked to you guys forever. As you know, I was gone pretty much the entire month of July, and I just got back last night. And I am so happy to be back home. It was a great trip. We drove across the country from North Carolina all the way out to Idaho and stopped and saw a couple sites with our kids. And we had a family reunion with Rob's family and spent time at his house. And then we drove back to Delaware and had a family reunion with my family. And then we drove back home, and we got home last night, and it's so nice to be back. And I missed you. So even though you guys have been hearing me every single week on the podcast, I pre-recorded them. So I haven't been able to talk to you in real time, and so I just miss you. And I hope you guys are doing amazing, and I hope you're having a great summer. I have been able to talk to my clients, and I've had so many consults in the month of July. It was amazing. And I have several that are already scheduled for August, and so I know a little bit about what's going on with y'all. But if you guys want to come hang out with me, come join my coaching program, and you can see me every single week. That would be so fun. And here's something that I did want to give you guys a little heads up on is my book. So as you guys know, I wrote a book, and I'm going to do a podcast episode on it next week, but set your calendar, mark your calendars. The book is being released on September 8th, and I'm very, very excited about it. I have a meeting with my publisher girl tomorrow and going over details of what that looks like. Someone asked me about how to pre-order. I have no idea. I don't know how to do this. I don't know what's going on. I don't know. I've never written a book before. So I will ask her that tomorrow. And so next week on the podcast, I should have information on how you can pre-order, or if you can pre-order. I don't know. Maybe that's not a thing. I have no idea. Again, I'll find out, but it will be released on September 8th on Amazon. So I'm so excited about it. And I feel like I need to do something special maybe the week before, kind of leading up to it. So let's do that, because that sounds fun. Also, if you guys haven't booked your tickets to come to Nashville, come join us. Okay. So October 13th through the 16th, that is when I am taking a group of 15 girls, 15 ladies, and we are going to Nashville for a go forward. I don't want to call it a retreat. We're having a go forward. Okay. And while I was gone, I had kind of an idea of what I wanted to do for the Nashville retreat, but I hadn't really solidified it. And while I was on this trip, it came to me all of a sudden, and all of it was, we're going to take everything that's in my book, and that's what we're going to focus on in the retreat. So if you guys haven't yet, go listen to that bonus episode that I did on Nashville, and then make sure you're listening for next week's podcast episode, because I'm going to go into what the book is about a little bit, and that'll give you an idea of what we're going to go over in the Nashville retreat and what we're going to focus on. But if you want a little sneak of an idea, the book is called The Not Enough Wife. And if you have ever felt like you aren't enough, then this is for you. And this retreat is for you, because that is what we're going to focus on. I'm going to teach you why your brain thinks you're not enough, where it thinks you're not enough, how it keeps looking for evidence of where you're not enough, and how to change it. And we're going to focus on that and dive deep into it in that Nashville retreat. And the coolest thing about this is that with that retreat, because it is the spots are so limited, it is going to be such an intimate experience, more than I've ever created ever before. An in-person intimate experience that I am so excited to bring to y'all. So if you guys are interested, go to jolenewynn.com. There is a tab called events. That is where you can find all the details for Nashville, and that is where you can reserve your spot. And I would encourage you, again, there's only 15 spots. Some of them are already taken. So go. If you guys are interested in it, go do it. Go sign up today. And especially because you're going to have to figure out traveling, how to get there anyway. So the sooner you do it, the better. So go sign up today, jolenewind.com, go to the events tab. That's where you're going to find all the details, and that's where you can sign up. And I can't wait to see you there. All right, ladies, today I want to talk to you guys about something that came up, and this has come up before, but it came up again on a coaching call last week with one of my clients. And so I wanted to bring it to the podcast today because, as I said, this is something that I have coached on many, many times, and I know that it's something that can come up. And it's what happens when our brain wants someone to blame. Now, I have done a podcast episode before on blame versus responsibility. Go back and listen to that one. It's very, very good. But I want to talk about this a little bit differently today, okay? Now, I had a client that came on the call, and she was talking about how she was talking to her mother-in-law, and she's like, I love my mother-in-law. We have a great relationship. But she said something that really irked me because she has no idea about my husband's problem. She has no idea that he's struggling with pornography. This client in particular, her husband is trying to overcome his struggle with pornography. He is actively pursuing ways to stop watching it, which I know is not the case for many of my clients' husbands or for many of you listening, but that was the case for her. And she said, I know he's really trying, and I know he's really struggling with this, and his parents have no idea. And she, the mother-in-law made some comment about how wonderful her kids are and about raising kids, and this is how she raised her kids, and look how well they turned out. And my client's thought was something like, well, if she only knew. Right? If she only knew. I could tell her so many stories. If she only knew the things that I've had to deal with because she didn't raise her son right and all these things, right? And she was saying, it doesn't make any sense because I really love her and I respect her and I think she did a great job. So I want to discuss this today because here's what happens is that our brain often wants someone to blame. Okay, it sees that there's a problem and it wants to identify whose fault it is because our brain thinks that if we can identify whose fault it is, then somehow we can fix it. Okay, if it's their fault, then it's something that we can change. We can ask them to fix it and it'll go away. Our brain also thinks it wants to find someone else to blame because it's worried that if we can't find anyone else to blame, that we'll somehow blame ourselves instead. Okay, this is very, very common. Our brain wants someone else to blame because it otherwise thinks that maybe it's our fault. If we can't find someone else to blame, then it often just turns back on ourselves. And our brain thinks, well, maybe it's our fault. Maybe there's something we could do. Maybe there's something we could have done in order to change what's going on in our life right now. That is not always the case, but that's what's happening in your brain. Your brain wants to identify, it's like, here's the problem. Okay, let's find the solution. What's causing it? Whose fault is it? Okay, and that's where it's going. So when your brain is looking for someone to blame, it's very common for your brain to want to blame the in-laws. Okay, very common for your brain to want to blame your partner, your spouse, your husband, whatever he is, that man in your life who's struggling with this. It's very common to want to blame his parents. Okay, here's one of the reasons why, is that it's very easy it's easier, I guess I should say. It's easier to hate your in-laws than it is to hate your spouse. It just is, because you love your spouse. Even with all his faults and his flaws and his struggles, you love him. It's much easier to blame your in-laws. You don't see them all the time. Even if you're close, you don't see them all the time. It's much easier to blame them and to say it's their fault. Maybe they should have done this differently. Maybe if they'd had more conversations about this. Maybe if they had known what was going on with him. Maybe if they'd had a better relationship or been more involved as parents, then he could have come to them and maybe they could have, handled this and then I wouldn't have had to deal with it, right? It's harder to hold hate or blame for a long period of time, especially or for our spouse, especially when he's struggling or he's actively trying to conquer it. Now, I know that's not the case, again, with everybody's spouse. I'm well aware of this, okay? But especially for women, when your husband is actively trying to overcome this, it's a lot harder to hold hate for him because you can see the struggle. Or even if you understand it, you guys, so many of my clients, their husbands started prepubescent, okay, between 8 and 11. And many, many times it was a result of some traumatic experience. Not all the time, obviously, but often, okay? It has happened more than once, okay? And so especially when that is the result of a traumatic event, our brain understands it. Intellectually, we get it. We can sympathize. And because we can sympathize, it's very hard to hold, hate and blame for someone when we can intellectually understand the reason, or we can appreciate the struggle, right? So it's easier to blame someone else. And our in-laws are a great scapegoat for this because we often have other feelings of frustration occasionally. Even if you have a phenomenal relationship with your in-laws, there are more negative feelings and you're not as close emotionally as you are with your spouse. So it's much easier to hold a negative emotion long term because you have less of an emotional connection, right? That negative emotion can sit there and it doesn't create as much of a problem as it does with your spouse because you're not typically interacting with your in-laws on a day-to-day basis as you are with your spouse. Does that make sense? So our brain likes to think, okay, if they had only done X, Y, and Z, then it would have turned out differently, right? Well, maybe. Okay, but it's also placing responsibility for your husband's decisions on his parents. Now, as a child, and when there's a child-adult relationship, a child-parent relationship, I guess I should say, yes, there is some responsibility that the parent takes for the child's decisions, their actions. However, they still have the ability to choose. So even if the parent, your in-laws, had taught him everything, had all the conversations, even if he had told them from day one and had been open and honest and communicated with them absolutely everything, and they had started therapy at the age of 11 and started doing all of these things to try and help him with it, it's still his choice. He still could have chosen to pursue this type of behavior, and you could still be dealing with it today. Your brain likes to think, if only, okay? It's very tempting for our brain to do this, especially about something but it's all hypothetical, right? If only his parents had done X, Y, Z, then maybe we wouldn't be dealing with this problem, right? It's very appealing to think this because it kind of does the what if. It's kind of a fantasy, right? Now, here's what I want to offer, is that is never, ever helpful. Did you guys know this? Ladies, it is not helpful for you to go back and think, what if? Because it didn't happen that way. And all you're going to do when you think, what if, is create an alternative reality that's completely hypothetical. It hasn't happened. It's not realistic. And it's just your brain living in an alternative that isn't your reality. And when your brain is living in an alternative, then it's just going to constantly compare that alternative with what is, and you will always find disappointment in what is. Does that make sense? It is not helpful for you to allow what if. I want to encourage you, ladies, if you're doing this, if you find your brain going to what if only they had done this, if only he had done this, if only his parents had been more open, had more conversations, known what was going on, taught him better, if only. That is never, ever helpful. If you find your brain sitting there, I want to encourage you to literally tell your brain, stop. You can even say it out loud. Just say, stop. This is a big red flag because all, again, it's going to do is compare this made up story that you have with what you currently have. Okay? And you're always going to come up lacking in the present moment. Your brain will always find a way to be disappointed in what you have when you have this thought pattern of what it could have been or how it might have been or if only it had been different. Living in if only it had been different is never, ever, ever going to help you. All it's going to do is create disappointment in where you are now. Okay? Even if his parents had done everything right, he still could have made the same choices. Okay, so when you are thinking about your in-laws and you're looking for someone to blame and your brain wants to blame your in-laws, which is so I want to encourage you to be on to your brain and notice that the only thing that this will do, the only thing that blaming your in-laws will do is create resentment in the relationship that you currently have with them. It's not going to change your husband's actions. It's not going to change his choices. It's not going to change his behavior. All it's going to do is create resentment and bitterness in your relationship with them. So notice that and be onto your brain and start noticing the thoughts that your brain likes to go to. And again, notice that the only reason that your brain wants to do this is because it thinks that if it can find someone to blame, then it means that it's not your fault. Does that make sense? Now, another person that is super common for our brain to want to blame is our past self or our husband's past self. Okay. Again, it is much easier to blame a past version of either yourself or your husband rather than to blame the current person. Now, again, go back and listen to that podcast episode that I did, Blame versus Responsibility, and you will see why our brain really wants to do this. But when your brain is looking for someone to blame, it's harder again to hold blame for the current person, especially if he's struggling, especially if he's making an effort, if he's trying. It's easier to hold blame if he's not. Much easier to hold blame for him and how he's ruining your life and how it's all his fault if he's not even trying, right? And that's totally fine. But sometimes we want to blame his past self because that's easier to hold that negative emotion for someone who's not there. Okay? His past self is not a physical human being who is in your life. It is just this idea of thoughts. It's a collection of thoughts about the past. So it's much easier to hold negative emotion toward that person because it's just an idea. Much harder to hold negative emotion for that person who's in your life and you're interacting with them, and you also have a lot of positive feelings toward them, which you all do. Otherwise, you wouldn't be listening to this. Otherwise, you still wouldn't be married. Okay? So it's also tempting to want to blame our past self. If I had known before we'd gotten married, if I had understood before we'd gotten married, because I have many clients who found out before they got married and they thought, oh, it's okay, we can totally handle this, let's keep going, right? And now they come back and, however many years they are into this marriage, and they think, if only I had understood how much this was going to affect me, I would have made a different decision. Okay. And again, I want to caution you ladies against this train of thought, because again, when you go back and you live in the if only and what if, all it does is create disappointment. And I've talked about this on the podcast before. You don't actually know that that's true. It's very tempting, and we want to think that we would have made a different choice, but we don't actually know that. It's really just a nice idea. Even because here's the truth, is maybe even if you had known, maybe you would have made the same decision. And it's also completely irrelevant because we can't go back and we can't change the past. All we can do is say, okay, that's the decision that I made. Whether or not I would have made it again is irrelevant. Here I am now, and what am I going to do with it? What am I going to do next? I can't change the past. It's very tempting for our brain to just want to go back and say, I would have changed the past. You can't do it, ladies. If you can, you should be a bajillionaire, because that would be the coolest thing ever if you had a time machine that could help you go back in the past and change decisions. You can't do it, okay? Now, because you can't, all you can do is focus on where you are now and what you're going to do next, which is actually much scarier. Much more scary? Much scarier? Which one is the word? I don't know. Okay, much scarier, much more scary. Okay, our brain doesn't like it because that is what brings up our discomfort. It's easier to have all these nice thoughts about what we would have done and how we would have behaved differently because we don't actually have to prove that. What's harder, what's more uncomfortable is saying, you know what, here I am now, and now what am I going to do with it? What decision am I going to make today in order to move forward? That's what I want you to focus on, ladies. There is no reason to keep blaming your in-laws or who your husband used to be or who you used to be when you were 20 and naive and you just started dating and you said yes, okay? There is no upside to that. There is an upside to saying, here I am now, no blame required. What am I going to do? Yes, I'm being affected by my husband's choices. Now what? I can sit and do the same thing I've always done, or I can change. I can make a decision that's going to move me forward. Can't change the past. It's done. It's led me here. Now what am I going to do about it? That is what I want you ladies to focus on. What are you going to do about it? What are you going to do next? Blaming him, blaming you, blaming your in-laws, none of this is helpful. Go listen to that Blame versus Responsibility and then listen to this one all over again, okay? And if you're struggling with this, if you find yourself blaming him, who he used to be, who you used to be, your in-laws, your sister-in-law, his best friend, whoever you find yourself blaming, if you're struggling with this, come join my coaching program. I will help you work through all of these thoughts, and I will help you overcome them so that you no longer have to carry the blame for yourself or for anyone else, because it's not your responsibility to carry blame. It's not your responsibility to blame anyone else. It's your responsibility to say, here I am now. What am I going to do next? And that's what I want you to focus on. I love you, ladies. I have missed you so much. I'll talk to you next week in a brand new episode. So take care. All right, ladies, if you are loving what you are learning on the podcast, I want to invite you to come join my coaching program. This is where we take it to the next level and we actually start applying and learning the how of moving forward. This podcast has taught you the what, and the coaching program is where you're going to learn the how. This is where you learn how to actually start moving forward, process all of that pain that you feel, and let it go once and for all. If you are ready to finally move forward and stop living a life that revolves around your husband's pornography addiction, then I want to invite you to come join me today. Just head to my website, joleneLynn.com, and sign up today. I can't wait to see you there.